Your consciousness isn't yours. Your thoughts aren't yours. Your identity is an elaborate fiction. And the path to genuine freedom, it runs straight through the center of hell. Dante wrote the roadmap. Jung provided the psychological framework. This is the most practical guide to liberation you'll ever encounter. Today we'll walk this path together, discovering how Dante's medieval journey through hell illuminates Jung's modern concept of shadow work, and how both point to the same profound truth about consciousness itself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why facing your personal hell isn't just therapeutic. It's the only path to authentic liberation. You'll see how Dante's demonic creatures and Jung's shadow aspects are reflections of the same psychological reality. And most importantly, you'll have practical insights for navigating your own internal inferno. Before we can descend into hell, we need to understand who or what is making the journey. We typically identify with our bodies, our histories, our personalities. We say, I am this or I am that, never questioning who this I really is. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear, the character we play. Dante begins his journey identifying entirely with this constructed self. But as we'll see, this identification is the first of three veils that obscure our true nature. The second veil is conceptualization. We perceive reality through mental labels, learned divisions. We split existence into good and bad, right and wrong, pleasure and pain. These divisions exist only in thought. Reality itself knows no such boundaries. This is why Dante's hell has distinct circles, each labeled and categorized. These divisions aren't inherent to reality, but are conceptual frameworks we impose upon it. The third veil is materialization, our belief in the solidity of the world, in the permanence of forms, in the reality of time and space. Dante's physical journey through hell is, in this sense, a journey through the material illusion. These veils create the self that will journey through hell, a self that must be dismantled and reconstituted if true liberation is to occur. Jung understood this when he distinguished between the ego, our conscious identity, and the self, the totality of the psyche. The journey is not about improving the ego, but transcending its limitations. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is precisely what Dante's journey represents, a deliberate descent into darkness as the pathway to light. Dante's Inferno begins with a crisis. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a dark forest, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. This dark forest symbolizes the moment when the constructed self can no longer navigate life effectively. The straightforward pathway, the conventional approach to existence, suddenly fails. Depression, anxiety, addiction, existential crisis. These modern terms describe what Dante experienced in his dark wood. Jung recognized such moments as the call of the shadow, when the unconscious demands integration. The shadow contains everything we've denied, repressed, disowned about ourselves. It's the parts of us deemed too frightening, shameful, or contradictory to our conscious identity. Most people refuse this call. They double down on existing strategies, seek distractions, cling to comfortable illusions. Why? Because entering hell is terrifying. It means confronting everything we've spent our lives avoiding. Dante too hesitates, attempting to retreat. Only the intervention of Virgil, representing wisdom and reason, convinces him to proceed. Similarly, Jung noted that confronting the shadow requires conscious commitment and often external support, a therapist, mentor, or spiritual guide. The call is universal, but few answer it willingly. They're forced into the underworld through crisis, trauma, or unbearable suffering. Yet those who consciously choose the descent discover something remarkable. What seems like a journey away from light is actually the only path toward it. In Dante's journey, Virgil serves as guide through hell and purgatory, but cannot enter paradise. This limitation is profoundly significant. Virgil represents human reason, analytical thought, intellectual understanding, essential for navigating the shadow realm, but insufficient for complete transcendence. Jung emphasized a similar limitation in the analytical mind. Understanding your shadow intellectually is merely the beginning. True integration requires something beyond rational comprehension. It demands direct experience, emotional processing, and symbolic engagement. Modern Virgils take many forms: therapists, meditation teachers, plant medicine guides, artistic practices. All serve the same function, helping us navigate unfamiliar psychological territory with greater awareness than we could achieve alone. But like Virgil, these guides have limitations. They can illuminate the path, but cannot walk it for us. They can interpret symbols, but cannot integrate them into our being. They can point to the door, but cannot force us through it. Ultimately, as both Dante and Jung recognized, the journey requires moving beyond the analytical mind into direct experience. The conscious mind serves as a guide, but only to the point where something deeper must take over. Abandon all hope, you who enter here. These words, inscribed above Hell's Gate, represent what's perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of shadow work: the necessity of surrender. We're taught that hope is vital, that optimism fuels transformation. Yet both Dante and Jung suggest something more nuanced. Certain forms of hope actually impede deeper awakening, specifically the hope that we can bypass suffering, avoid uncomfortable truths, or escape the consequences of our nature. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Similarly, Dante must witness and experience hell's horrors directly. There's no shortcut, no bypassing of the difficult terrain. This surrender isn't fatalistic despair, but radical acceptance. It's the recognition that genuine transformation requires encountering everything we are, including the aspects we've denied, repressed, and rejected. The paradox is powerful. Only by abandoning hope, specifically the hope for an easy path, do we find the courage to walk the difficult one that actually leads to freedom. This is why modern spiritual bypassing, attempting to transcend darkness without first integrating it, so often fails. It's trying to reach paradise without passing through hell. Crossing this threshold requires brutal honesty. We must acknowledge our capacity for destruction, our hidden resentments, our secret desires, our unadmitted motivations. Not to indulge them, not to judge them, but to recognize them as aspects of the whole. In the upper circles of hell, Dante encounters souls condemned for sins of incontinence, inability to control their desires. Lust, gluttony, greed, and anger represent the unrestrained energy of becoming, the vital force of creation and manifestation that, when unconscious, creates suffering. These circles represent Jung's concept of repressed desires becoming shadow elements. When we deny our natural impulses, sexual desire, anger, ambition, they don't disappear. They're pushed into the unconscious, where they gain power and autonomy. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The upper circles of hell demonstrate this principle vividly. Those souls didn't recognize their unconscious desires as part of themselves, so became possessed by them. The lesson isn't to indulge every impulse, but to consciously relate to them. Neither suppression nor indulgence leads to freedom, only awareness and integration. The energy of becoming isn't inherently problematic. It's how life manifests and evolves. Problems arise only when it operates unconsciously, outside awareness. Dante doesn't judge these souls from a position of moral superiority. He recognizes their humanity, often feeling compassion. This illustrates another Jungian principle. Integration begins with compassionate recognition rather than moral condemnation. Deeper in hell, Dante encounters more severe transgressions: violence against others, oneself, and divine natural law. These circles represent the energy of inertia, the force of unconsciousness, resistance, and stagnation. When the shadow remains unintegrated, violence becomes inevitable. Not necessarily physical violence, but psychological and spiritual violence. We attack what threatens our illusions. We destroy what challenges our identity. We violate natural principles that would otherwise guide our development. Jung observed that collective violence stems from the collective shadow. When societies refuse to acknowledge their darkest impulses, those impulses eventually erupt into physical manifestation. The heretics in the sixth circle represent dogmatic thinking, rigid adherence to belief systems that reject contradictory evidence. In psychological terms, this is cognitive dissonance, the mind's violent rejection of information that threatens existing beliefs. Those who harm themselves in the seventh circle represent violence against the self, not just literal self-destruction, but all forms of self-sabotage, self-hatred, and inner punishment. When shadow elements are turned inward, we become our own tormentors. Those violent against God represent rebellion against reality itself, the refusal to accept limitations, natural laws, or the basic conditions of existence. In Jungian terms, this is inflation. When the ego believes itself superior to the natural order, these middle circles reveal how unacknowledged shadow creates increasingly destructive patterns. The more we deny our capacity for violence, the more likely we are to enact it unconsciously. In hell's lowest circles, Dante places the fraudulent and treacherous, those who deliberately betrayed trust. These represent self-deception, the deepest and most dangerous aspect of shadow. The fraudulent used intelligence to deceive others, employing the uniquely human capacity for sophisticated lies. The treacherous betrayed their closest connections: family, guests, country, benefactors. At the very bottom is Judas, who betrayed his spiritual teacher. These circles correspond to Jung's concept of self-betrayal and inner fragmentation. When we systematically lie to ourselves, denying our deeper nature, we fragment psychologically. We betray our authentic being for temporary advantage or comfort. Satan himself is frozen at hell's center, immobilized in ice, eternally consuming Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. This striking image represents the ultimate consequence of complete shadow denial: paralysis. Those who refuse all shadow integration eventually freeze their own development. Jung observed that psychological development halts when we refuse to acknowledge difficult truths about ourselves. We become rigid, inflexible, unable to adapt or grow. Like Satan trapped in ice, we're immobilized by our own denial. This is why Jung insisted on confronting even the most disturbing shadow elements. Not because they're pleasant to acknowledge, but because refusing to do so leads to this frozen state, where growth becomes impossible. In Dante's cosmology, Satan occupies Earth's exact center, the geometric midpoint of the created universe. This positioning isn't accidental. The center of hell is simultaneously the center of the self. The paradox is profound. The lowest point is also the turning point. When Dante and Virgil reach Satan, they climb down his body, flip upside down at Earth's center, and begin their ascent. The journey downward simultaneously becomes the journey upward. Jung recognized this same paradox in shadow work. The darkest aspects of our psyche, once fully confronted, reveal themselves as gateways to the self, the totality of who we are. What seemed most distant from our divine nature turns out to be its essential component. This echoes the mirror metaphor from Eastern wisdom traditions. Consciousness is like a boundless mirror. Everything that exists, every form, thought, and experience, is a reflection appearing within it, The mirror never changes, yet accommodates every possible reflection. It remains unstained by what appears, unaltered by what it contains. You are this mirror, not the reflections appearing within it, but the mirror itself, the pure awareness in which all experience arises and subsides. Even the most terrifying demons of the Inferno are ultimately reflections in this mirror of consciousness. This realization marks the crucial turning point in both Dante's journey and in shadow work. What we fear most, the center of hell, the depth of the shadow, reveals itself as the doorway to what we seek most. To begin their ascent, Dante and Virgil must climb down Satan's body, a powerful metaphor for shadow integration. They don't destroy Satan. They don't bypass him. They use him as the means for transcendence. This illustrates Jung's approach to shadow work. The goal isn't to eliminate shadow aspects, but to integrate them consciously. The energy bound up in repression becomes available for creative use once acknowledged and accepted. Jung called this process individuation, becoming the unique, whole individual you're meant to be. It requires bringing the three primary energies, awakening, becoming, and inertia, into conscious balance. The energy of awakening moves toward truth, clarity, and understanding. It's the light that illuminates, the wisdom that reveals. The energy of becoming drives creation, manifestation, and evolution. It builds civilizations, propels life forward, and creates new forms. The energy of inertia provides stability, consistency, and form. It holds things in place, maintains boundaries, preserves what's valuable. None of these energies is inherently positive or negative. Problems arise only when they operate unconsciously or fall out of balance. Shadow integration doesn't eliminate any of these energies, but brings them into conscious relationship. The ascent requires effort different from the descent. Going down, gravity assists. Coming up demands strength. Similarly, confronting the shadow has its own momentum once begun, but integrating what we've discovered requires sustained conscious effort. As Dante emerges from hell, he sees the stars again, symbols of possibility, orientation, and transcendent reality. This moment represents what happens when shadow work reaches completion. We perceive reality with new clarity. This isn't about becoming someone different, but recognizing who we already are. Jung described this as wholeness, not perfection, but completeness. Accepting all aspects of the psyche creates internal harmony that external achievement never can. The practical applications are profound. Shadow integration reduces projection. We no longer attribute our disowned qualities to others. It increases energy. What was used for repression becomes available for creative expression. It improves relationships. We relate to others more authentically when we're honest with ourselves. Most importantly, it brings freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within difficulty. The integrated person doesn't escape life's challenges, but navigates them with greater awareness and choice. Dante's Inferno and Jung's shadow work share the same radical insight. What we most fear confronting is precisely what we most need to face. Your consciousness isn't yours. It's the universal awareness expressing itself through seemingly individual forms. Your thoughts aren't yours. They arise from collective patterns, biological impulses, and cultural conditioning. Your identity is an elaborate fiction, a necessary one for functioning in the world, but a fiction nonetheless. And the path to genuine freedom? It runs straight through the center of hell, through complete acknowledgement of everything you are, including what you've denied, rejected, and feared. The most profound paradox awaits. When you fully recognize the darkness within, you discover it was never truly dark. It only appeared so because you refused to illuminate it with awareness. The path begins where you least want to look. Start there.